Good to go? Cool. All right. So, chapter 3 is titled Redefining Sin, and it compares and contrasts the two brothers. My first question is, in what ways are the two brothers, the two sons, similar? I'm sorry, different. In what ways they're different? Second question will be how they're similar. Spoiler alert.
Sorry, what was the question again?
The first question is, in what ways are the two sons different?
One disrespected his father and ran away and lived frivolously, and the other one stayed home and continued to work for his father, though was disrespectful in the end.
Yeah, the proximity, like the physical proximity is different, right? I mean, the one physically walks away. It's very apparent that he walks away because he's not in the same town. But the other one is still living there at the estate, serving alongside him, seemingly. Yeah, at least physically close to him. What else?
They have different ways of tackling, I would say, a similar problem, but in very different ways. One, I think, it tackles it externally, like the younger son. It's external difference, or not. I'm sorry, not the younger son. The older son. It's stuff he attributes to external, what he does, whereas the younger son would be more internal self.
Seems like the older son was a lot more socially conscious than the younger son.
Yeah.
Maybe I should say aware.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I hadn't noticed that. But yeah, the one is older son does seem to be more conscious and aware of what others are looking at, what others are doing, or what others are thinking of him, rather. They're going to perceive his actions. Good. All right, so then I already kind of asked the question, but now I'll actually legitimately ask it. In what ways are they similar? Because we talked about the differences, and externally they're pretty different. But there are some similarities that Tim Keller brings up. So what similarities do they share?
Kind of brought it up already, but they were both extremely disrespectful to their fathers, and how they behaved and what they did when they were confronted with their sin, I guess.
Yep, they were both definitely very disrespectful. What else?
Both more interested in what the father had than in him.
Yeah.
They both had their own end goals and were trying to reach those end goals.
Yep, for sure.
At this point, it just feels like I'm paraphrasing, but neither of them had an authentic relationship with their dad.
That's a good point too. Yeah. They both chose to be separated from their dad. Right? The first one by walking away from our town, the other one by staying out of the party. And the dad sought reconciliation with both as well. I guess the similarity from the dad, how he dealt with it instead of the sons. Yeah. Yeah, but I think the big one that Keller drills down on is definitely they both wanted what the dad had instead of wanting a relationship with him. Well, that's something I've been thinking about a decent amount this week. Even at church today, there's a part in the song where the line was, "You hold my healing in your hands. And you guys know I've been going through some health stuff with my knee lately. I'm thinking, well, that would be like, why can't God just just heal it up? Kind of struck me. I was like, okay, well, if he doesn't, if he continues to hold that healing in his hands, like, am I okay with that? Am I okay coming to God in worship and in prayer, even if he never, chooses to heal this particular ailment for me, which is, a minor ailment compared to some of the things other people are going through. It was just an interesting experience, a convicting one for me, knowing that I was going to be talking about this tonight, thinking, like, I wonder how much of my prayers, even throughout the week, are trying to get that healing or something else from God, what he has in his hands, instead of coming to talk to God as my Lord and Father. In what ways am I still the elder, one of these brothers, even though I think of myself as a Christian, and I am. I think we all are here. But in what ways do I still have the brother tendency of wanting what the Father has instead of wanting just the Father? And granted, it's nothing wrong with bringing God our requests and wanting what God has for us. However, if we want that more than we want God, that's the problem. We want it on our terms, not God's terms. I think more often than not, more often than I care to admit, that is the case in my focus. So we can relate to both of these sons on that, I think. Good. Anything else on the similarities before we kind of move on to the next question?
I think maybe for both the subconscious assumption that their dad himself wouldn't make them happy.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And that manifests itself in a lack of trust, right? Because
Yes.
neither one is happy with how the dad is managing the estate. The younger one just says, "Hey, give me my share. I'm gonna do this my way." And the older one calls his actions into question and bring the younger son back. So neither one is happy with how he's governing. Both are saying, "I don't trust you. I'd prefer to. I know I can govern better than you."
Didn't think about that, but yeah.
And that's ultimately what sin is, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, sin is us putting ourselves up in God's place, or trying to, and saying, "No, what God says is wrong. I prefer to be the boss here. I'll decide, what's right and what's wrong." That was the original sin. That was the whole point behind the garden. You shall be as gods if you this fruit, and why we originally fell. So that's what both brothers are doing here as well.
The idea that God is holding out on me and he doesn't mean what he says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. One of the claims that Tim Keller makes in chapter 3 is, here's the quote: "You can rebel against God and be alienated from him either by breaking his rules or by keeping all of them diligently." Um, is that true? And if so, why? How would you explain that statement? It's the rear of the statement. You can rebel against God and be alienated from him either by breaking his rules or by keeping all of them diligently.
I feel like that's kind of like that verse. You can speak with the tongues of angels, and if you have not love, then it's all but dung. So if you keep all his commandments diligently, but you don't know him, or you don't love him, then it's completely pointless.
I. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You can do it for the wrong reasons, completely wrong reasons.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think doing it for the wrong reasons is breaking a rule, if you want to put it that way.
I agree on that because what I've seen happen even is that the focus becomes on the rules and not necessarily on the rule maker. And so with someone, you know, they follow the rules and then they expect a certain result. And so it can definitely have two things. Like one, for other people who they look at, they see that, oh, they're not having these results. They must not be following the rules.
Was there a 2?
Well, two is that for them, if they follow the rules, but it doesn't come out as they expected, or the person making the rules didn't keep up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, so you guys are all kind of tracking down the same path, which is the correct path. That the motive matters. The rationale for doing good matters. It's not that doing good is a bad thing, but you can do good for bad reasons. You can rebel against God by, breaking the rules, number one, or by having your heart in the wrong spot. And if you're following the rules with the intention of manipulating God, following the rules with the intention with the intention of just trying to use it to get leverage over God so that you can use some of God's power, then that is also rebelling against God because again, you're trying to use God for your agenda, and that's not what God's there for. God's not there to serve you. You're there to serve God. God's the authority. Um, you're the creature. You're the created one. So it's almost a pagan style thing. The pagans would, when they did sacrifices, they would sacrifice in an attempt to get the god to do something for them. If you guys have ever read the Iliad? I've been reading a lot of Greek stuff this year. I've read the Iliad, and in the Iliad, the Greeks are very religious in there and are sacrificing all the time, but they're doing it to try and get leverage over these gods. So if I sacrifice enough bulls to Apollo, maybe Apollo will come down on my side and whack a couple of the other guys with disease during the next battle. They're not doing it because they love Apollo, and nobody in particular in ancient Greek particularly loved the gods except for maybe the Spartans once in a while. But but it was they all did it to try and get the gods to do something for them, and that was honestly I made the joke about the Spartans, but that was really why the Spartans were so religious, was because they figured, well, this is another way of protecting our city. Like, don't make the gods mad, and the gods won't make the battles go against us. So it's a pagan style of doing things, and that's what Jesus is saying that the Pharisees are guilty of, which would be very offensive to the Pharisees, of course. But yeah, that's why you can follow the rules by doing, but still be doing things wrong. You can be doing, trying to follow the Jewish law, making sacrifices, those sorts of things, but doing it so you can, not so that, because you actually love God, but so you can get God to smite your enemies or what have you. All right, so one of the things that Keller talks about in this is the definition of sin. And if you were to ask the average person on the street to define the word sin, what do you think they would say?
I think for them, they'd probably say doing bad things and not doing enough good things.
Possibly give extreme examples instead of actually defining it, like, oh, if you're a murderer, or oh, if you steal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How many people on the street actually use sin, though? Would they know what you're talking about? Or is that just a Christianese?
But I think at least in America, people have it, but they have this general, very what's the word? It's very fluid. I want to say it just depends who you're talking to, kind of.
I feel like they use it mostly as a joke.
I will have to admit I have to be more careful about my trick questions with Lady Angrith around. She's more used to putting up with my garbage. Yeah. So I did word that question just because I kind of wanted to see if anybody would catch that. But yeah, I do think that most of the time, if somebody did, not think of sin as kind of a joke, I think that they would take an extreme example of murder, theft, yeah, those sorts of things. But how does Jesus challenge this definition of breaking the rules in this parable? How does he change the definition of sin? Since Keller says he's redefining sin, what does he redefine it to?
I'm rereading the paragraph.
I'm sorry, and repeat the question again for me. I was trying to follow in.
Yep. So if Jesus in this parable is changing the definition of sin from rule breaking, what is he changing the definition to? How does he redefine sin, as Keller titles this chapter?
Feel this is not quite the word I'm looking for, but rebellion against God in any type of form. He redefines it to a relationship with God. And I'm doing this without looking at the book, so I'm not sure I'm completely correct on that.
Yeah, I would say. Sorry, was someone else talking? Go ahead.
That was me, but you go first.
Oh, okay. Beg pardon. Redefinition, not having an authentic relationship with God.
I was just going to say, putting yourself in the prime spot. You are number one. You don't need God. You're above God instead.
Yeah, and I was trying to find the actual line. I did not note when I wrote down the question. I have prep on Garth. Okay. For those who have the paperback copy, it's on page 50, and it's in the top of the page. So in page 49, he talks about how Jesus redefines. Nearly everyone defines sin as breaking a list of rules. It says Jesus shows us that a man who has violated virtually nothing on the list of moral misbehaviors can be every bit as spiritually lost as the most profligate, immoral person. Why? Because sin is not just breaking the rules, it is putting yourself in the place of God as Savior, Lord, and Judge, just as each son sought to displace the authority of the Father in his own life. This was ironically talked about in church today too. So sin then isn't breaking rules. Sin is literally rebellion against God. It is placing yourself in God's position as the authority. Spoiler alert, this will tie in well with Romans as well. Because Paul defines sin the same way in Romans. All right, so then here's my last question. Let me open up to whatever you guys have. Is this new definition of sin more or less challenging than the kind of cultural rule-breaking definition of sin?
I would certainly say more difficult because it can be very subtle.
Go ahead, Winged. Your light's orange. We're not using the orange lights because there's only like 4 of us. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just got home, and so I can finally actually look at the screen. Um, I would honestly say it's probably both. It depends on where your heart is. If your heart's in the right place and you're putting God first, then it is a lot easier because you have your priorities in the right spot. So following God is a whole lot easier if your heart is already in the right place and you can follow all the rules. If you don't have your heart in the right place, then it is extremely difficult to go through all the rules and try to follow them and obey them and get everything quote unquote prioritized.
Yeah, what Fuss said, basically, if you're tied to a list of rules, the goal, I guess, is more defined, but it's also great burden to make sure you go through and obey all those carefully. But if one has a renewed heart or can ask for a renewed heart, there's more hope that basically that one can be pleasing to God, even if one fails continually.
We're on to you and your trick questions, Onger.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to this question. I think personally that it makes it much more challenging, because although I would agree with Winged Feet, that if your heart is in the right spot, it makes it easier. I know that more often than not, my heart's not in the right spot, and scripturally, I would doubt if anyone's heart is really in the right spot from the beginning. By nature, our heart's in the wrong spot, as we have and we'll cover in Romans. So it makes it so that everyone is kind of equally in need of God, because everyone has this bent towards um, towards wanting ourselves to be the ultimate authority, wanting ourselves to be the one in power over God, the one's calling the shots, to be the one who's the one in charge. So I think that if that's the rubric, we certainly all fall short equally. How far we stray from the actions, from the externals, I think we can, there's everybody strays, but some people stray more than others away from the rules. But when it comes to our heart distance from God, not the physical distance like the sun's, but the actual emotional distance, the spiritual distance, I should say more precisely. On that, we're all unfathomably far away from God and in need of His help to reach out to us. And in need of His salvation instead of trying to save ourselves. Because I don't think any of us could get away from that want to be in control, to be the authority without Him. All right, that is all I had. So, anything you guys have to add? Anything that jumped out at you from this chapter? Why you did or did not like it?
Might one say that by redefining sin, one makes it necessary to also redefine the solution?
That is interesting.
Makes you appreciate the gospel a whole lot more.
Because if it's about keeping the rules, and we're not capable of doing that with the hearts we have right now, then the answer can't be to try harder to keep the rules, including all the subtle behind the scenes motives, feeling ones.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And especially if it's about a heart, bent, a bent towards desiring power, a bent towards wanting to be the one in control, bent towards rebellion. The only way to fix that is to replace the heart, which we know that Christ does. So it's a good point. It does require a rethinking, a redefining of the solution as well. Hashtag Roman study on Thursdays.
For me, it kind of, when I was reading the chapter, it kind of struck me how it constantly seemed to come back to in a way, a control issue. It doesn't always seem like that on the surface, but it was an attempt to be in control of life and all the different aspects of it. Both your brother.
Yeah, for sure.
Sprinkles Minor created streaming.
It's not fun to be accused of being controlling.
Shada SHK disconnected from your channel.
Uh-oh.
Speaking of control, my dog is upset that she's not in control.
Shada
and is
SHK
flinging
joined your channel.
her box around right now.
Apparently, there's a shortcut I did not know about.
You hit a shortcut key.
It wasn't that one.